Hello, Manchester United fans. Welcome to this Manchester is Red podcast from me, Sam Hutchison, at the Manchester Evening News. Today, I'm joined by Tyrone Marshall. How are we, Tyrone?
I'm good, thank you, Sam. I'm very good. Looking forward to another weekend of Premier League football after a pretty difficult week for United, I think it'd be fair to say.
Yes, it's not been a straightforward week, shall we say, for Man United. But we've got plenty to dive into straight away here. I mean, where should we start other than the mounting up injury issues? There's just been so many this week specifically. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of small ones this season and pre-season already. Obviously, Maguire last week, McTominay missed a little bit of pre-season, I think, with injury. But obviously this week it's become more serious. Mason Mount picked up an injury against Tottenham. He came off in that game, and I think we all thought he came off because he was basically anonymous after a good first 15 minutes, second half particularly. Whether that was to do with his injury, maybe, although he was pretty anonymous at times against Wolves as well. So he picked up an injury there. It seems nothing was mentioned post-match, but obviously it's come out since then that he's going to miss at least the next 2 games until the international break, which is maybe a blessing in disguise. We'll maybe touch on that later, but the midfield was clearly a bit of an issue. But the Luke Shaw one that broke last night is just a huge blow. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The defence and the goalkeeper is the one area of this team that looked pretty settled. I know Ten Hag's picked the same team for 2 games, but the midfield's been overrun and they've not been scoring enough goals going forward. So midfield and attack probably needed looking at. The defence, you'd have just said, go again. They've defended pretty well. Onana's been good. But now to have Shaw, who is undoubtedly one of the best players under Ten Hag, out injured for maybe a couple of months, maybe more, is just a massive blow, especially at a time when Tyrell Malacia is injured as well. Ten Hag kind of hinted today that he might be back in a couple of weeks, but he's not played in pre-season. I don't think he's trained at all since the start of pre-season. He's going to be a good few weeks behind in terms of match fitness and getting ready. So they're without a senior left back, you would say, for at least a month, maybe 6 weeks. They've just literally just yesterday let their third choice left back Brandon Williams go on loan. That probably happened maybe a couple of hours before Shaw picked up this injury. It shows how the quirk of fate these things can be sometimes. I don't know whether that would have influenced Ten Hag's thinking had he known. Obviously, Williams has been nowhere near it in pre-season, and Ten Hag made it pretty clear he was looking for something new, and that's why he wasn't picking him last week. But he is at least a left-back with Premier League experience, and now United don't really have that. They're going to be forced into makeshift solutions. So it is, the injuries are mounting. It kind of adds up to this whole on and off the pitch, things have been a bit of a mess so far this season. And when it rains, it pours, and the metaphorical water is pouring through that leaky roof at Old Trafford at the moment because all sorts of things are going wrong, and Ten Hag can't catch a break at the moment.
No, I mean, obviously there is another left back in the squad. Ten Hag hasn't shown too much faith in Alvaro Fernandez. Is it likely that he could make his debut against Forest?
I would think, probably not, I would say. I would be amazed if it wasn't Dalot coming in at left back and Wan-Bissaka staying at right back. Dalot has played at left back before. You wouldn't say it's his best position, but he has done it. When the role involves inverting, as we like to say about fullbacks now, the lack of a left footer isn't necessarily as big an issue. So I would think it would be Dalot. I don't even know whether Fernandez will get on the bench, to be honest, because Maguire obviously wasn't on the bench last week. He might be fit enough to return this week. Leaves you without fullback cover really, but Lindelof could do a job at right back. Martinez maybe at left back. So I don't know. I mean, the interesting one with Fernandez would be what they do in terms of a departure now, because there's been a lot of interest in him. Granada were seemingly leading the chase yesterday. It could go on loan or permanently. It was viewed over the next week, so that might change. I'm guessing, depending on if they look for a left back. But Ten Hag has been absolutely ruthless with the academy, and especially with players of Fernandez's age when they get to 20. And it's it probably is an age where if you're not playing for United now, if you're not very close to the first team, then there is little point in staying, because it probably needs to happen now. And we saw it last year. We kind of got a hint of his approach last year with Garner, when I think everyone thought he'd stay around it and Ten Hag just took a look at him and said, no, not good enough at the moment, off you go. And he's done the same this year with, you think back to last pre-season, and Zidane Iqbal and Charlie Savage were the big winners, both look good in central midfield, both gone for fairly small fees this year. It is very much a case of, if you're good enough, you'll get chances. If you're old enough, you're good enough, but you've got to be good enough first. And it seems he's decided a lot of them aren't good enough. And with Fernandes, he's had a good look in pre-season, and you get the impression that he's maybe decided not quite ready. The fact United are open to a permanent transfer in the last week of the window suggests that's the case. And I think if he's not even on the bench tomorrow, it's probably an indication that maybe a move will still be on, especially if they can get some kind of replacement in for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at free agents just before we went live here, and there really isn't that many free agent options. There's not a name that jumps out to me as a replacement left back that could be a realistic option, say, if Man United want to go back into the market. Obviously, our chief Man United writer, Samuel Luckhurst, has written a piece today saying that Man United are looking to go back into the market for possibly a replacement left back. Malacia hopefully won't be out for too much longer. Is it really worth going for a replacement left back at this stage of the window? Or is it worth making do with Diogo Dalot, like you suggested? Lisandro Martinez has played there previously in his career. Could we see him even play a couple of minutes at left back with Lindelof coming into the central of defence?
I mean, the Martinez thing is certainly an option. I think that the problem with that is you lose so much from the centre of defence in terms of build-up and a left-footed build-up option as well. And Martinez's passing is absolutely brilliant. And I think moving him to left-back, you just lose so much of that I think that'll be down the list of priorities. That'll be real emergency case stuff, I think. In terms of a signing, it's got to be someone who's good enough and can come in and make an impact. Otherwise, it's really not worth it. We were kind of in this position in January when United were skint essentially and had to sign Sabitzer, who did okay, and Weghorst on loan. And Weghorst just offered nothing really. 2 goals in the cup in 31 games, and there's an argument that one of the kids in the team in the academy could have done better than that across those 31 games. Obviously he offered more than just his goals, but it does seem maybe unnecessarily. It really does depend on the quality of player available. I mean, Ryan Bertrand's a name that's been mentioned already today. He's not played in 612 days a competitive game. His last game was for Leicester in the League Cup before Christmas, December 2021. I mean, that is for a 34-year-old who's had knee surgery since then, which is why he's not played, to have gone very close to 2 years, like 20 months now, without playing a competitive game. There's no way he's going to be ready to play for Manchester United anytime soon. So that, for me, just doesn't make any sense. Even if you sign him this week, he probably needs 6 weeks at least of training and a few under-21 games to be anywhere near ready to play in, by which point Malacia will probably be back. We don't really know the length of his injury, but Ten Hag seemed to suggest today he will be back. Sure, if it is 2 months, won't be far away, so it's got to be someone better than Bertrand. Signing Bertrand would just be literally signing someone to have in the squad. He won't even be on the bench, I don't think, for a month to 6 weeks at least. So that makes no sense at all to me. If they want left back cover, and with both injured, you can kind of understand why they do. It's got to be someone who offers something. Otherwise, you just stick with Dalot. You keep Fernandes in as the emergency option, and you try and muddle through, because this is part of being a football manager, really. These things can happen. You want 2 players for every position. Very occasionally, both will get injured. Just find a solution. Ten Hag suggested that today, and the solution isn't always in the transfer market. Weghorst is a fine example that sometimes signing a body just for a body's sake really isn't worth it, and doesn't particularly matter. So, yeah, I think it's a fine balance in terms of who's available, and at left back, there doesn't feel like there's a load of names available, really.
No, I mean, you mentioned earlier on that Mount's injury may be every cloud has a silver lining with Mount's injury. Who do you think will come in for him? Because somebody's got to replace Mason Mount. It hasn't really been working in midfield in the first 2 games of the season. Obviously, Forest are probably a better side than Wolves. They're not quite as good as Spurs, but the midfield was ran all over by Bissouma and Sarr at Spurs. who's going to come in for Mason Mount? And do you think there's an option for someone to really make a name for themselves to be the first choice, even when Mount is fit?
I'm not sure. I think when Mount's back, he'll be back in the team, and we'll have that midfield three again of Casemiro, Mount, and Fernandes. But it's definitely not been working. And Ten Hag was pretty defensive of the midfield in his press conference today, and defensive of Casemiro. He basically said the analysis of the midfield was wrong and that there was issues everywhere on the pitch. But for me, it starts with midfield for sure, and they have not looked good enough and not looked sharp enough, fit enough, energetic enough in the first couple of games. They were totally overrun by Wolves. They started quite well at Tottenham, but as soon as Tottenham put a bit of pressure on, the gaps in that midfield were pretty alarming. The lack of physicality and energy there was pretty alarming. Casemiro, as much as Ten Hag is saying his stats against Wolves were brilliant, I'm not really seeing it at the moment. He looks sluggish to me. He looked sluggish when he came in last season. So maybe it'll just take him a bit of time to get going. But at the moment, he doesn't quite look there. And then it's clear tactically they've moved it on a bit this year. They're pressing much more aggressively as a unit. And Casemiro is so high up the pitch at times. He's United's deepest midfielder, but sometimes that's 15 yards inside the opposition half. And they do, excuse me, they're just being bypassed a little bit too easily, I think, at the moment. And something's got to change. And I think Eriksen will be the one to come in for Mount. Personally, I would, and I know this is not going to be a popular choice. Anyone driving at the moment, grab hold of that steering wheel, and anyone out for a run or whatever, try and stay on the pavement. But I would bring in McTominay for Mount and just look to shore things up, bringing that physicality, that edge, that steel that's been missing, really. And partly with a view to next week as well, because I think if you go in next week with Casemiro, Eriksen and Fernandes, and they're still in the same kind of form, that midfield is going to get battered by Arsenal on current form. There's no two ways about it. Havertz, Rice and Odegaard could just run all over that midfield, especially if they are playing the same way and lacking the same sort of zip and energy and organisation. And Eriksen, as good as he was in the first half of last season, we've not really seen it since his injury. And I just think away at the Emirates, I'd probably rather have McTominay in there alongside Casemiro. And it might not be pretty, but at least there's a bit of energy in there, a bit of fight in there, and it just feels a bit more secure. That midfield, maybe not as good on the ball, but a bit more secure. And after the first two games, I think that's what they need. Maybe once this team settled down, if this had happened 2 months down the line and the team had settled down, you'd probably say Eriksen's the obvious Mount replacement. But given where things are at the moment, I just think there's an argument to go with McTominay and just look to calm things down, even if it means you grind out a pretty dull 2-0 win against Forest. It's still job done. And I think that's the better option rather than bringing Eriksen in and risking another end-to-end open game. Forest have got midfielders like Gibbs-White who would look at the space United have been affording players and think, I'll have some of that. And if that's still there tomorrow, Forest might fancy their chances at Old Trafford with the spaces that have been available. So I think I would play it safe and bring McTominay in. But I think Ten Hag will bring Eriksen in. I'll be very surprised if it wasn't Eriksen.
Yeah, I mean, I was having a little think the other day and I said, I'd like to see Scott McTominay stay past this summer with what looks like a lot of outgoings coming in and going out of the club and a lot of changeover in that midfield. I feel like Scott McTominay brings something that nobody else in the midfield really does with his energy. He can do box to box. And alongside, we haven't really seen him alongside Casemiro, or at least I don't remember him being alongside Casemiro in sort of what would be a double pivot at all last season. I think maybe he does deserve a chance to really prove that he has still got a role at Manchester United. Obviously, we will be talking transfers in the second part, so Man United fans, join us in the second part where we will talk transfers. Welcome back to part two, Man United fans. So, Ty, transfers. I mean, Man United look like they still have quite a busy window to do. There's been links to Altay Bayindir. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. What do we know about him? We don't really know too much, but what do we know about him coming in from Fenerbahce?
I mean, in terms of what we know about him, we know probably his age and his height off Wikipedia, and that's about it. I'd never heard of the name until it cropped up the other day. You were saying before we came on air that you'd never heard of the name. Obviously, the Turkish Super League is not particularly big over here, but he is Fenerbahce's number one. I can't say I know a lot about him stylistic-wise, but I can have a guess given what Ten Hag wants from his keepers. It seems it's something that is probably likely to happen, obviously dependent on Henderson going. I mean, that looks an outgoing that is eventually going to happen. I think we've been waiting for it all summer, but I think Henderson going is still likely to happen, and at that point United will sign Altay Bayındır. It seems even more likely that Fenerbahce have already signed his replacement, Croatia's number one, Dominik Livakovic, who had a pretty good World Cup and is clearly going to Fenerbahce to be first choice goalkeeper. There can be no doubt about that. So Bayındır is clearly going to go, and you'd say United are 99% the destination. It's just a case of waiting for Henderson's departure to be confirmed. He's pretty experienced goalkeeper. He's played 5 times, I think, for Turkey. Signed for Fenerbahce 4 years ago. Been number one for about 3.5 years. Played 40 times last season. They did quite well in Europe, I think, last year. Maybe the quarter-finals of the Europa League. Or maybe the last 16. I think they maybe lost to Sevilla. So maybe it wasn't quarters because that's when United lost to Sevilla. But they had a pretty good season anyway. He's clearly good enough to be in and around the Turkish setup. He's only going to be back up to Onana, and it doesn't seem it's going to be a huge fee. There's some uncertainty around the fee. I've been told that he's got a release clause of about €5 million, but reports in Turkey are saying it's going to be a €6-7 million fee, so not entirely sure exactly what that release clause is and whether it's still active or there. But either way, it's not a big fee. Even if Henderson goes on a loan with an obligation to buy, United will be making a profit across those 2 deals. So yeah, I think that is one incoming that is pretty certain to happen over the next 7 days.
Yeah, and I mean, on Henderson, we've seen a lot of links. He's been linked to Forest pretty much all summer. We've seen links to Crystal Palace in the last week. Where do you think is going to end up a realistic destination for him? Because it does look like he is, like you said, going to leave Man United this summer.
Yeah, I mean, I would think one of the two. Obviously, that's pretty obvious. I mean, they've both got okay goalkeepers in goal, I guess. Matt Turner's come in at Forest from Arsenal, has played the first 2 games. Sam Johnston's played the first 2 games for Palace. They're both decent keepers, but you would say they're also potentially both just backup keepers. So I think both Forest and Palace would see Henderson as a number one. I guess Forest, having spent money on Matt Turner this year, could maybe pass up on Henderson. They clearly love a transfer at Forest, so I'm sure they've got another keeper in mind if that happens. Sam Johnston's maybe the weaker link at Palace. You would think Henderson's probably got they're probably a slightly more ambitious club than Forest as well. They're probably going to finish higher up the table, you'd think. So maybe it's Palace that are edging it at the moment, but I think both the clubs where Henderson's going to be number one, and that is clearly what he wants to do. I would think both will stay up. Certainly, I'd have Palace more likely to stay up than Forest, but I think both will stay up. So, I think both are pretty realistic options for Henderson, and you would expect that to happen. I think when Tom Heaton's injury came about, I think we all thought, here we go again with Henderson, the man who just cannot manage to leave Manchester United as much as he's wanted to over the last few years. I think it would have been extremely unfair to keep him again to the point that he'll be 27 next year and give him 5 or 6 cup games this year. I think that would have been unfair. That he's got to go. With the story about how he was told he was going to be number one in 2021-22 has been well versed now. He was pretty unfortunate there, I think, in that he got COVID that summer and struggled to get over it. Gave De Gea the chance to start the season in goal, and it was De Gea's best season recently. So he was a little unfortunate with that, but he clearly needs to go and play. And I think whether he goes to Palace or Forest, I think both are pretty decent moves for him. And as long as it's a loan with an obligation to buy, I think both would be acceptable to United as well.
Yeah, I mean, especially if he wants to get back in the England setup.
England, yeah.
In time for the Euros next summer, he's got to be playing first team regular football. And I think if he isn't going to leave Man United this summer, is it ever going to happen? we keep seeing these links year after year. He was wanted by Ajax when Ten Hag was there. He's been wanted by multiple clubs, linked to multiple clubs across Europe throughout his time at Man United, and nothing permanent's ever materialised. And if he does want to be earning his way into the England setup, he does need to be playing first team regular football. Someone else who really needs to be playing first team regular football to keep his spot in the England setup, Harry Maguire. Well, what is going on with Harry Maguire? What's the latest with his sort of situation? Because there's more reports today that the West Ham move is not completely a closed door. What can you tell us about Harry Maguire's summer business, if you want?
I mean, as things stand at the moment, he is staying. Obviously, the West Ham move was pretty close to happening, but ultimately fell apart. Financial issues there in terms of Maguire's wage at United and what West Ham can offer him. And they've since, as much as it might still be alive, the West Ham have signed a centre-back since in Mavropanos from Stuttgart. They've spent big on Mohamed Kudus today. I think they're in the market for someone else who's I completely forgotten who it is now. But obviously they've got a lot of money to spend, but whether that's still on Maguire, I'm not sure. It would require some sort of agreement. I know there was a feeling at United in July that they might have to pay some of Maguire's salary to get him off the books. I'm sure he'll get criticised for that, but he is, he is within his rights. He was given that contract, and ultimately he does really want to stay. I think a large part of him still wants to stay and fight for his place and prove that he is good enough. I also wonder about Ten Hag's comments. I can't remember the exact word he used, and it was while I was away, so I wasn't at the press conference. But when he said about he needs to stay for fight his place, or if he's no longer got the fight for that, or something like that, or the confidence to do that, or the fight for it. But I did read that and thought, if I was Maguire reading that, I'd kind of be thinking, well, actually, then, I'll prove you wrong. I have no idea if Ten Hag regretted that choice of words or not. But when it's maybe a player that you're trying to say, if he wants to stay, he can and fight for his place. But deep down, you're thinking, we'll take the money for him and let him go. I'm not sure it was exactly the right choice, because it kind of suggested that, the inference you got was that McTominay would basically leave United if he'd given up and if he'd accepted that he hasn't got the fight for it. And as a professional footballer, your pride would look at that and think, well, I'm not going on those terms then. So I do wonder if those comments maybe have had some impact on him staying and just saying, in that case, I'm going to stay. And I am going to fight for my place. And we've seen with Shaw and Malacia, Maguire's still in there. He's third or fourth choice centre back, and these things can happen like they have at left back, that suddenly he's playing and might get 10, 15, 20 games in a row. I still think it suits every party if he goes, really. But the longer it goes in this window, probably the less likely it gets. There's obviously Johnny Evans there still as an option to come in for a year as fourth choice. I don't think that would be particularly disastrous for United if it happened. And the fact it hasn't happened yet makes you wonder maybe if it is contingent on Maguire in some way, shape or form. But, as things stand, he's staying. And it's going to take, it's going to take one party at least to make an effort to change the situation for that to happen. Either Maguire accepts those reduced terms, either United agree to pay, give him a payoff and a bit of that extra salary, or West Ham themselves bump the salary up. So at the moment, I think it's off and it's stuck at an impasse, and it's going to take one of those three parties to do something different to get it moving again.
I mean, would that leave Man United with a lot more business to do? We sort of think that Man United aren't done yet in the transfer window. Would that leave United then looking for another right-sided centre-half? We've seen a couple of links when Maguire looked like he was on his way to West Ham. We saw links to sort of Edmund Tapsoba, Jean-Claire Todibo, and Benjamin Pavard, obviously. Pavard has since got closer to Inter Milan. Does that leave Man United at square one again, looking for another right-sided centre-half if Maguire is to leave?
Possibly. Obviously, like I said, they've got that Evans emergency button to press. He could do a job as fourth choice, but he is 35, coming off the back of a very injury-hit season at Leicester. I think they would probably want a Maguire replacement at some point, and the longer it goes in this window without Maguire going, the harder that gets, obviously. Whether that's right or left-sided, I'm not sure. That Ten Hag has been very big on this right foot, left foot centre-back combination, which is why we saw Luke Shaw replaced Martinez last year rather than Maguire and Lindelof. So I wonder whether he might even look at a left footer, or at least someone who plays more often on the left of a partnership to replace Maguire. But yeah, they would potentially want a replacement, and they are kind of running out of time. There's other departures that are probably more likely. We mentioned Fernandes, Eric Bailly at centre back has got to go over the next week, and then probably one of Donny van der Beek or Hannibal will go as well. And I think even if Maguire goes, I wonder if Ten Hag might feel it's more pressing to get another midfielder in, and whether that will take precedence over a centre back at the moment.
I mean, on midfielders then, Van der Beek, it looks like he's been on the edge of a move for a couple of weeks now. Real Sociedad were heavily linked with Van der Beek as their David Silva replacement. That's gone very quiet. And also on Hannibal, I thought he was quite impressive in pre-season. He came on, he really showed a bit of heart and played quite well in the limited minutes he did get. What's sort of the situation there? And can you see Man United signing another midfielder possibly this window?
I think it's a possibility for sure. Sofian Amrabat at Fiorentina, I think, is now training alone, or was this week, and wasn't in Fiorentina's squad for their European game, I think it was. That clearly hints that there's a possibility he's leaving. A lot of that has been driven by the press in Italy over this summer, and I think it's fair to say that people within his camp have been working pretty hard to link him everywhere. I don't think it was a coincidence that Liverpool suddenly became desperate for a number 6 last week, and stories in Italy appeared that they wanted Amrabat. I think that was the opportunism maybe of whether it's his club or people around him desperate to get him a move and get him out there. United still seem to be the front runners in terms of that deal. He's obviously worked with Ten Hag previously. Ten Hag definitely likes him. It's definitely an option for United, even if it's never been as far advanced as those reports in Italy state. It'd clearly be a decent signing. It'd add something to United. It'd probably add what that midfield's missing at the moment. Like I said before, that physicality, that edge, that energy. So I do think that's still a possibility. I think it's dependent on sales still, and that's the interesting element. I think there was probably a view that at least one of McTominay or Maguire would go this window. Neither have done. I'm with you. I'm not sure selling McTominay and Fred necessarily in the same window is a wise move. I know United are kind of moving on from them, but midway through the second half at Tottenham last week, I looking at that game and thought this is ideal for Fred, and suddenly he's not there anymore. So to sell both, I think, might have been kind of taking the cull too far. Even if we accept McTominay's probably only got 12 months left. In terms of Van der Beek and Hannibal, Van der Beek was pretty close to Real Sociedad, but it has cooled down a bit. It'll be interesting to see whether he's on the bench this week, because obviously there was 2 keepers on the bench last week and 2 players who were on the bench. Probably Dalot and Ericsson are going to be in the first team, so there's going to be people to come in, maybe Maguire and then maybe one of Hannibal or Van der Beek. Ten Hag said last week that Van der Beek wasn't on the bench because he wanted something new, as did Brandon Williams. Williams has moved on. Van der Beek's still here. He played in that game against Burnley in midweek, so there's a chance maybe he'll be there. I think one of him or Hannibal will go, maybe only one of them. With Hannibal, I've often wondered where he fits into a first team environment. He's kind of he felt like a bit of a throwback that in modern midfield there was maybe no real role for him, but I thought he's done pretty well in pre-season. Given how often Fernandes plays and how little he needs cover, there's an argument you'd keep Hannibal as Fernandes' backup almost. But there's definitely a chance he could go in the last week of the window. Borussia Dortmund have been interested, and if Van der Beek ends up staying, I think I'd be more open to selling Hannibal. And it's another example of Ten Hag's approach to youngsters, really, that if you reach 20 and you're not in the best 15, 16, 17 players at the club, then you're probably going to get sold, and maybe it's considered a good time to cash in on Hannibal.
Yeah, you mentioned Amrabat there. It seems to me like his agents have been using Internet Explorer. They've been so slow. They're 6 months behind when would have been the perfect time to be looking for a move for Amrabat after such a fantastic World Cup. Obviously, another player that's been linked this week, mainly for the fact that he's previously worked under Erik ten Hag, Ryan Gravenberch from Bayern Munich. What's the story around that? Is he someone that Man United are really considering?
Yeah, I think he's another name that is definitely on that list of potential midfielders. I would say he's a different profile really to Amrabat. Amrabat's more of a 6, Gravenberch more of an 8, I would say. But I think he's definitely a player that's on that list and is under consideration. His situation at Bayern Munich's unclear. I mean, Bayern have been pretty adamant all summer they won't sell. He's obviously he's someone Liverpool have looked at for a long time as well, and they've had the impression all summer that Bayern won't sell. But again, I don't think he's played for Bayern yet this season. I think he's maybe been an unused sub. He's certainly been on the bench for their first few games. So he's, it's maybe something that could change in the final week of the window. If he's going to be nowhere near it for Bayern, he's probably going to want to go and play. It's a bit of a cliche now, but Ten Hag clearly likes players he's got some experience of and has previously worked with, and Gravenberch is one of them. And he was very highly rated at Ajax. It's not worked for him at all, really, at Bayern Munich. So you can understand why he would want to reset and a move. So I think that's definitely a possibility and one to watch going into the final week of the window.
I mean, when Gravenberch was at Ajax, he basically filled the spot that was vacated by Donny van de Beek. And is it just a repeat of that? We'll just have to wait and see. And if this move does happen. Anyway, that's the end of part 2. In part 3, we're going to be previewing the Nottingham Forest game this weekend. Welcome back, Manchester United fans, to part 3 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Nottingham Forest tomorrow, 3 p.m. Saturday kickoff. What are your initial thoughts, Tyrone?
Interesting, I think, would be my initial thoughts. It's one of those games that has got to be a home banker, but it doesn't feel at the moment it's a home banker. United are on this long unbeaten league run at Old Trafford again. They're pretty solid at home, but the trouble that Wolves gave them 2 weeks ago would be concerning. Wolves having 23 shots, and an XG of more than 2 in that game. And then Wolves themselves go and lose 4-1 at home the following week, even if that's to Brighton. I think I look at Wolves and I think they're almost certainties for relegation this year at the moment, the way things are going. And the fact that they gave United such a game at Old Trafford is concerning. We've had the injuries since then. There's obviously turmoil off the pitch. Doesn't necessarily have an impact, but it might do. There's the planned sit-in protest after the game. That obviously shouldn't affect things during the game, but if things do go wrong, I think it's clear that there is the potential for the atmosphere to turn a little bit toxic at the moment. And just the way United have been playing, it should be a home banker. It's one that maybe they'll find a way to win, like I said before, 2-0. Just go back to a professional performance, grind it out. But with the lack of goals in that team at the moment, with the way the midfield's been malfunctioning, with now the absence of Luke Shaw and a bit of a makeshift left back, I think there is reason to be concerned. And Forest have started the season pretty well. They were certainly not disgraced in losing 2-1 at Arsenal. Got that last-minute winner against Sheffield United last week. That's the kind of game that they definitely need to win if they're to stay up comfortably this year. So I think they will come here and probably look at it and think the way United are playing, we've got half a chance of taking the game to them.
Yeah, I mean, Forest look a lot better than Wolves at the very least. And we saw how much of a problem Matheus Cunha caused Man United's midfield in what is a poorer Wolves side. Are we just going to see a repeat of that with Morgan Gibbs-White? Let's hope not, at the very least. They do play very similar positions, obviously. In terms of team changes, obviously there's the injuries. Mount and Shaw won't be playing. We've already discussed that. In attack, it's just not been working for Man United in the first 2 games of the season. Is there any changes there that are realistic and possible?
I mean, I would look to make one to get Rashford back on the left. I think so much of this season is contingent on improving that goal output, and Rashford needs to get close to 30 again, which I think is a big ask. They need Højlund to hit the ground running. I think it's an argument already that this season is so much of this season's success is down to Antony being a lot better than last season and Højlund hitting the ground running, and both of those are probably uncertainties. Antony's not started the season brilliantly. I think there's no doubt he keeps his place, but he's not started the season well. Rashford's been pretty ineffectual at centre forward. So I would look to make a change. I'd look to get Rashford back on the left and maybe get him back in those positions where he's facing goal rather than his back to goal. I guess the issue there is what you do at centre forward. Martial, we know Hojlund's not going to be in the squad. Martial got 5. Well, you say 5. I think he got 6 minutes last week, but as usual, there was 9 minutes injury time, so he got a quarter of an hour really. He played against Burnley on Tuesday, I think it was, in that 3-0 defeat at Carrington.
That behind closed doors.
Doors game, yeah. So he's got a lot of football in his system now. He's been back in training since the second week of the pre-season tour in San Diego. I think it was July the 24th, the Monday in San Diego, when Ten Hag said he was back in training that day. So that's a month now. So you would really like to think he's ready to start a game. Even if he's only got 55 minutes in him, at least it gets Rashford on the left. So that is what I would be looking for, really, to maybe bring Martial in, get Rashford on the left and drop Garnacho to the bench, because as you know, this felt like an opportunity for Garnacho. He was really good in that last pre-season game at Old Trafford against Lens, but it's not happened for him so far. And I was a bit disappointed in him against Tottenham, to be honest. I thought he had so much space on the left against Pedro Porro. Porro never got near to him, gave Garnacho so many opportunities to run at him, and the end product just wasn't there. So I think he would be my fall guy if Martial was fit to kind of change that attack, and most importantly, get Rashford in the position I think he looks most dangerous at the moment.
I mean, Garnacho was quite unlucky, arguably, to not see his shot turned into a penalty at the very least. Yeah. With that Romero handball, was it not? I mean, I would probably pitch for the same. Is it likely we can see Sancho start in that false 9 that he played in pre-season? It's clearly a thought in Ten Hag's head, but is it a real option that Ten Hag's willing to use in a Premier League fixture? We just aren't really sure at this point. Is Martial the only player that we're not really sure where Ten Hag sits on sort of his future at Man United? He's always in his press conferences. He's always really complimentary. You know, he just says he's always got a role. And then even when he is fit to start, we don't see him, or he'll come on for the last 5 minutes of a game, like you say. Is Martial, what do we think Ten Hag's really doing with Martial? Is he just trying to get him fit, trying to get him back match fit again so he can at least play a little bit of a role this season as a rotation for Højlund? Or is he just not a big fan and he just won't say it?
I actually think he really likes him. I think there's a degree he's being handled very carefully. But you can't handle someone that carefully. They need to be robust enough to be playing games. We saw it last season when he missed quite a while. In the second half of last season, he had a decent period out after the City game when he played 45 minutes against City and came off at half time. And he was handled so carefully then coming back into the team. First half of last season, they actually thought he was really good. He was again on and off with injuries. I mean, I think he missed 29 games last year with 5 separate injuries, and that is clearly not sustainable. That has to change. He needs a full season of playing. But I thought he was good last season. Ten Hag has always been complimentary, and I think he's been so complimentary that it's more than just trying to suggest to potential buyers this is a great player or whatever. It's several times now he said that Martial's the kind of player that makes everyone else better. He makes the system work. In that press conference in San Diego, we called him a brilliant football player. And I know that in the first pre-season tour last year, when they had, when he was fit and he played a lot of games, that Ten Hag and his staff were really impressed with his pressing, which might sound a strange thing to say when fans look at Martial and think he's lazy, but they felt that his pressing was very intelligent and spot on, really. And pressing isn't about doing what Bruno Fernandes does at times and losing your head and just chasing the ball. That's disastrous pressing. It's pressing with a structure and knowing when to press that Guardiola, Klopp, Ten Hag, Pochettino, these managers want. They don't want headless chickens chasing the ball. And I know for a fact that Ten Hag and his coaches were very impressed with Martial, knowing when to press, knowing when his pressing triggers were, what angles to press at, things like that. I do think he actually likes him as a player, but obviously he's got to be fit enough, and he's also, I think if there's one criticism, I wonder maybe if Ten Hag and his coaches think that he doesn't play through pain enough. Maybe this is what happens when you have the injuries that Martial does, that you begin to think everything's an injury that could get worse. So I do think it's a big year for him. He's got a year left with that option on his contract. It might be that come January, United are taking the option and just looking to sell him in the summer if it's not working again. But if he can stay, I would like to see him stay fit for a full season under Ten Hag and just see what happens, because I do feel that Ten Hag likes him as a player. But if he has another season like last year where he's having 3, 4, 5 different injury problems that keep him out for 18, 20 games, then I think it's game over.
Yeah, before we came on air, we were saying, Martial's clearly a good footballer. And with the addition of Højlund, he's not going to be the first choice striker, you wouldn't have thought, going into, when Højlund is fit. I would like to see Martial play a bit more football, because we know there's a good footballer in there, and we know that, he is a talent and he can make a difference to this United side and probably revitalise this attack that so clearly needs revitalising. Someone else who needs revitalising, Antony. I was watching the game against Spurs with a couple of my mates who are United fans, and they were just so disappointed. They know that he's got this skill, but they just don't see it enough. And I mean, me and you don't see it either, but from our standpoint, you can sort of look past it. These United fans are expecting so much of Antony. They're just not seeing it. This was his season to sort of kick on and become £100 million player, which is what he should be for £85 million. What do you think's going wrong? And do you think it's maybe a chance for Erik Ten Hag to sort of take him out the side and see what he can do to sort of fix Antony's game at the minute?
I think he'll stay in the team. I think Ten Hag's got incredible faith in Antony. I think he feels that last season the conditions weren't there for him to succeed, really, that he needs this striker like Højlund, this strong physical presence that can hold the ball up and get Antony running into better positions. He, like you say, he needs a big second season. I think that he did just enough last year, I think, to say that the jury was out, that it was an okay season, without ever looking like an £85 million winger. And obviously he's damned a little by that price tag, because United will accept they overpaid for him, and they could have got him for £25-30 million less, probably 6-7 weeks earlier in that window, and ended up essentially being ripped off by Ajax and just agreeing to Ajax's demands. So that kind of brings its own pressure, that price tag. But he didn't look like that kind of player last year. His skill is pretty ineffectual, really. It's more of a showboating skill, but he needs to influence games more often, whether that's running at defenders, cutting inside, producing goals and assists. There needs to be more. I thought he finished pre-season pretty well, but again, we've not seen it in the league yet, and that end product just has to get better this year. It'd be interesting to see him with Højlund in the team, with that kind of physical hold-up number 9, and whether that does bring more out of him. But I mentioned it before, and you're right that this is a big second season for him, and it does feel like a lot of whether this season will be a success or not, and kind of how we're judging Ten Hag and transfers, is going to be dependent on Antony and what our views are of him at the end of this season. And if it comes to, if at that point we're looking at United spent £85 million on a winger who just can't cut it, then that's obviously going to be a problem for Ten Hag. If he does kick on and improve suddenly, then his eye for a player continues to look good and impress, and he continues to get his own way in the market. So I think there's pressure on Antony this year, and I think that brings a little bit of pressure on Ten Hag to get the best out of him as well.
Yeah, and I mean, last but not least, Pellistri. He's actually looked energetic, exciting when he's come off the bench. Do you think he deserves a bit more of a chance? Maybe not this weekend, but going into the future of the season, do you think Pellistri's... Because at the start of the summer, it looked like a loan might be the most realistic destination for Pellistri. Now it looks like Erik Ten Hag's really thinking about including him into his matchday squads at the very least, and into the future of the United team. What's the sort of situation there? Do you think he's good enough to start putting a bit of pressure on Antony? Do you think he's good enough to start putting a thought in Erik Ten Hag's head? Maybe Pellistri's what we need on the right side of attack.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely. I think Ahmad is the more likely. Obviously, he's got a pretty serious injury at the moment, and I don't know how impressed Ten Hag was with him, with what we saw in pre-season. But I think Pellistri is something different. He's a right-footed right winger. He's a bit of a throwback in that sense. He's very direct. I would be perfectly happy seeing him stay in the squad and be a bench option and just someone a bit different this year. Equally, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he did go on loan somewhere this week and play. Obviously, he still needs games. He is, I think he's 21 now. He needs to be playing games. I think he's probably played for United more than Uruguay now, but it's a pretty close run thing, and it was Uruguay that were winning that contest by the time he came back from the World Cup pretty easily, because he hadn't even played for United at that point. So, I think when he does play, I think we see him influence games and do things and cause defences problems. So it would be good to see him, especially with Pellistri, with Ahmad's injury. Maybe we do see him stay around and influence games as that kind of point of difference as a sub. And with 9 subs now, there's enough to carry someone like that. He might only get on in 1 in 3 games. So, I think he's good enough to be a squad member. I don't think he'd be anywhere close to getting in the team ahead of Anthony, but certainly as a squad member, it'd be good enough. But like I say, if we're sitting here next Friday and he's gone on loan somewhere, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
And on Ahmad, I'm a massive fan of Ahmad, understandably. I think he's brilliant. This injury's just come at the wrong time for him, hasn't it? I mean, he was looking to make a thought in Erik ten Hag's head. Ahmad can really be, if not the first choice option, the backup option, playing, because Man United are likely to play nearly 60 games again this season, maybe even over 60 games again this season. There's going to need to be rotation in every position. Ahmad's injury is just so unfortunate for him to come at this time. But for Forest, what would be your starting 11 you'd choose? Any score predictions? Anyone you really want to look out for from Forest?
I mean, I would make those 2 enforced changes. I think Dallow's a certainty to replace Shaw. Like I said, I'd go for McTominay, but I think Eriksen is close to a certainty to replace Mount. And then I would, if he's fit enough, start Martial and bring him in for Garnacho. I think that'd be the changes. The score predictions, it's a difficult one, the way United are playing, and if they remain so open. I mean, I think a 2-0 win would be great. I think United fans would snap their hands off. I think Ten Hag would snap hands off now for that, just to look secure at the back and get through it and get the win. But we know Forest have got players. We mentioned Gibbs White, Brennan Johnson going forward, Tayo Awoniyi, back end of last season, seemed to really find his feet at Forest, and he scored in both their games so far this season. So he's a real threat.
Yeah, he scored in 6 straight so far.
I see, right, okay. So these two, he's a real threat as a number 9, and they've got some dangerous players going forward. So I do think it's going to be a test for United. So if they can get a win with a clean sheet, I think that'll be a pretty successful afternoon.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think a win here is going to be, with such an injured and depleted squad, I think a win here is the most important thing. Obviously, it's the most important thing. It's a game of football, but I do think it's going to be a lot more difficult than the Wolves game was. They aren't as good as Spurs. Spurs have looked really good under Ange. I would have to say a narrow win as well. But Man United fans, thank you for listening to this episode of the Manchester is Red podcast with me, Sam Hutchison, and Tyrone Marshall. Check us out on Twitter at SamHutchMen, and Tyrone, what's your Twitter handle?
At TyMarshallMen.
And thank you for watching or listening. See you next time.